Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of our Coromon team building series. In part 1, we went over how easy it is to get into competitive Coromon. We also talked about the type of roles you might be filling on your team. In part 2, we talked about the types of teams you might be building for. And in part 3, we're going to talk about the types of cores you might be utilizing. If you enjoy Coromon and other monster taming content, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and jump on in. As we're getting started, I want to give a really brief definition of what we're using for cores for this video. So cores are Coromon you commonly will use together that form some kind of set unit. For this video, we're going to focus on 2 Coromon cores, but you can also have 3 or 4, even 5 or 6 if you really wanted to. Typically though, it's about 2 to 3 Coromon that work really well together, either defensively, offensively, or both, and synergize really well together. The first core we're going to talk about is Big Bearealis and the monster that is Ucaclaw, 2 tremendous wall breakers in the Coromon metagame right now. Bearealis being an ice type, Ucaclaw being a water type, but they have really great coverage together. Their attacking prowess makes it really hard for walls and tanks to come in repeatedly, and they also deal with each other's checks and counters surprisingly well. One great answer to Bearealis is Vulbrute, who can come in on ice type attacks, normal type attacks, and not take much damage, and if it's defensively invested, takes very little from splatter. Unfortunately, Vulbrute has a harder time taking Pistostone attacks from Ucaclaw, so if you pull a sneaky double and get your Ucaclaw in, you're in a really good position to have switch advantage, or fire off a Pistostone head crash on a protected switch. Overall though, does a really good job of covering a really solid check for Bearealis. On the flip side, Ucaclaw will have a harder time breaking through bulky waters, although that's kind of a misnomer because Ucaclaw breaks through everything, but ideally a bulky water is your best answer to Ucaclaw, or one of your best answers, and Bearealis hits those super effectively with potentially Roz boosted avalanches or Pistostone boosted avalanches to easily clear out those checks and counters that might be coming in for Ucaclaw. So they work really well together in breaking down some defensive cores. They hit tremendously hard. One downside though is you do have to figure out on your team which one might be running the Pistostone versus an Ackerstone versus Overcharger or a Boosting Berry. It's good problems to have though. They're really flexible in the items that they can use because they hit so hard and are a really powerful wall breaking tandem. Next we have a double ice tandem that used to be Moth and Big Bear that was absolutely devastating. Moth would set up the Antarctic that would boost the speed of both Moth and Bearealis. Unfortunately, there's been a nerf to Moth and it no longer has an Arctic, but Arcturos does have it. And it's interesting to note that Arcturos can also be an offensive Coromon with Magic Lair that boosts the amount of damage it gives for special attacks. It also, in that same ability, will take less from special defensive attacks. So it is possible you could have Arcturos setting up an Arctic and being a support mon on the special defense side, while Bearealis is just your wall breaker. Overall though, the double ice of Antarctic, boosted speed, and firing off ice type attacks is still really effective. We're just not using Glamoth anymore, we're using Arcturos. But the same base still stands if you don't have enough fire types, or you don't have enough P.E.K.K.A users or Maka users. Eventually those ice type attacks just wear your team down, so make sure you're thinking about that for your team or for your team prep against somebody else. The core of Dugterra and Eclyptor typically isn't seen together, but I love the idea of it, so I wanted to feature it in this video. Dugterra is probably the best mixed attacker in the game when it's using the Enhancer gem. Eclyptor naturally is really good at that as well, with super high speed, high attacking stats for both special and physical. And what's really great about this pair is that your opponent has to figure out pretty quickly, for their sake, who is physical, who is special. Typically Dugterra will be special, and Eclyptor will be physical, but you can easily tip that on its side. You can also look at some of the calculations for Dugterra's speed with Escapist Plus, to see if you can run less speed and more HP, or more attack if you're running a specially based set to do more damage overall. This is more of a theory Coromon set or core, but I do like the idea of it having 2 really powerful mixed attackers to go against your opponent, and they both have really solid typing in the current meta. So although I don't have much evidence that this is a really good core, I do suggest you try it out and leave a comment down below on your thoughts. The next core we'll talk about also includes Ucaclaw. It's a great Coromon, it's really good. If you haven't gathered that from the videos lately, please be prepared for it. But it pairs very well with Gelaquad because Ucaclaw provides the humidifier, which is going to boost the damage of water type moves. and with the coverage and damage that both Ucaclaw have, with the boosted humidifier, and just overall coverage, they're very hard to deal with for walls and tanks and just teams in general. It's a little bit on the slow side, so you may want to run Pistostone on your Gelaquad and Acker on your Ucaclaw, or switch it up if you want to be anti-meta. But ultimately, these two water type Coromon are very difficult to deal with and provide a lot of support to your team as well with humidifier. So definitely consider using this core together. Even though it will be double water, it pairs together really well. I do want to mention a few defensive cores that work pretty well together, starting with Malavite and Atlantern. Two Coromon that have seen better days, but overall still pair really well together typing wise. A lot of what's going to hit Malavite super effectively, Atlantern can come in on, and vice versa. They also have higher defensive stats in special defense and defense, with Malavite being more of a special defensive tank or wall, and Atlantern typically being more of a physical wall, usually not a tank, so usually just a physical wall on that end. Before the merge, you would typically see Atlantern run max special defense. That's probably not as common anymore. If you wanted to, you could run max HP, max defense to deal with things like Ucaclaw, then have Malavite come in with max HP, max special defense to deal with other things like Arcturos and other special attackers. So they're two Coromon that work well together. I will say though, Atlantern's fallen off a little bit in terms of its viability. Likely we'll see some kind of updates for it, but Water Sand overall is a pretty good backbone for a defensive core, and they can come in on each other's weaknesses pretty well, and their different defensive stats complement each other really well as we're going through our different cores. We also have Vulbrute and Malavite, which were a really solid core, I would say pre-merge and during the beta testing. As we get to the full merge being live, it's not as viable anymore, but it's still really awesome. What I like about this core is that, one, Vulbrute is a really good physical wall and Malavite is a really good special wall, but you can also run them offensively. Malavite used to run a Pomo fruit set that was really good. Vulbrute used to run an offensive set that would kind of blow teams back a little bit. So you do have the option to run them as tanks, one as a maybe physical attacker, one as a physical wall, both of them as walls, both as attackers. So you get a lot of flexibility out of these two mons. They're really viable in the meta right now, and ultimately don't leave you hanging if you do decide to run them as a defensive core. So something to keep in mind. Not as fun or as potent as the offensive cores we talked about, but Brute and Malavite defensively still work really well together. And I can't go a core video without talking about Slitherpin. I haven't actually thought ahead of time of like what I would pair with it, but something like Crybeak would probably do pretty well. For those of you who don't know, Slitherpin's ability, Spike Body ++ with the Koana Rock, does 50% damage if you attack it physically, like you actually touch it. So a lot of people are going to run things like Splatter to avoid that damage that's going to take. Things like Crybeak that resist water can come in pretty easily on that. Typically you're going to see Slitherpin or Serpike, if you're running that, be physical. Crybeak is almost always going to be some kind of special wall, special support. So they have some natural synergy there. You could probably run Serpike or Slitherpin with a normal type as well, like maybe Cyberbite or Golbeak. Those are also two pretty good Coromon that work with it. And actually we'll highlight Golbeak because if you are running Golbeak with like the P.E.K.K.A. Stone, you still get the entry hazard control with Golbeak, and you also get Spike Trap with Slitherpin. It does double up your poison weakness a little bit, but because the only poison move right now that does damage is Poison Chomp, likely you'll switch into Slitherpin, can take two of those and not as huge a problem. So Slitherpin, haven't thought that one out as much, but just want to highlight, it's just such a good Coromon to have as a defensive core, especially if you're trying to deal with those really heavy hitting physical attackers that make contact. One other core I want to mention that's going to show up on a lot of teams so you should be prepared for or use yourself is Golbeak plus something like Vulbrute. Typically Golbeak is going to run the P.E.K.K.A. Stone, so really great switch into special attackers. And with Tactical Retreat, you can come in, take multiple hits, switch out, and just heal that damage off. Vulbrute is a really good physical wall with the Maka Stone. You'll run that with max HP, max defense. They fit so well together because they're using the opposite items and opposite defenses. They're also really viable as well, so it's easy to fit them into any team or start building with those two, and fill out the rest of your team using the roles and type of team that you want to build. So didn't want to go the whole video without specifically highlighting those two in their defensive roles, and especially those two together in their defensive roles. And that will do it for our core video. A little bit shorter, and over time our cores are going to evolve, but I wanted to give you a sense of some different pairings of Coromon you may want to use on your team, or just some ideas of the types of Coromon you might want to pair together. We will have part 4 coming out really soon as we go through a complete team builder and hopefully test that team out as well. And if you enjoy the content, the series, monster taming content, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Alright, bye everyone.